Germans mocked Britain's ugly Spitfire until it shot down 12 Messerschmitts in 9 minutes, August 15, 1940, 11:15 hours, 25,000 feet above the English Channel. Hauptmann Werner Mulders, the Luftwaffe's rising star with 14 confirmed kills, led his staffel of Messerschmitt Bf 109s toward the British coast. Through his canopy, he watched contrails marking the bomber formation ahead, 55 Stukas escorted by his fighters. The radio crackled with contemptuous laughter as his pilots discussed the opposition they expected. The British Spitfire, one pilot transmitted, looks like a pregnant duck. Fat wings, bulbous fuselage. Our streamlined 109s will tear them apart. Mulders smiled beneath his oxygen mask. He had seen intelligence photographs of the new British fighter. The designers at Supermarine had apparently prioritized aesthetics over aerodynamics, creating a rotund, ungainly machine that offended German engineering sensibilities. What Mulders and his pilots didn't know was that at that precise moment, Squadron leader Donald MacDonell of No. 609. Squadron was already diving on them from 30,000 feet with 11 Spitfires at his back. The British fighters, dismissed as ugly and inferior by German propaganda, were about to demonstrate why elliptical wings and a Rolls-Royce Merlin engine could rewrite the rules of aerial combat. In the next 9 minutes, MacDonell's squadron would shoot down 12 Messerschmitts, damage 7 more, and scatter the entire formation without losing a single aircraft. The engagement would become known as the massacre over Maidstone, and it would shatter every assumption the Luftwaffe held about British fighter capabilities. The mathematics of the engagement would prove devastating. 12 German fighters destroyed in 540 seconds, 1 kill every 45 seconds. German pilots who had dominated the skies over Poland, Norway, and France were about to learn that British engineering hadn't created an ugly duckling. They had built a swan with teeth. The contempt began months before the first shots. When the Messerschmitt Bf 109 first encountered Spitfires during early reconnaissance missions in late 1939, German pilots filed reports that bordered on mockery. Oberleutnant Franz von Vera, who would later become famous as the only German prisoner to escape from Canada back to Germany, wrote in his combat diary, "The British fighter is aesthetically offensive. Its elliptical wings give it the appearance of a flying manta ray. Our sleek 109s represent Aryan engineering superiority." This aesthetic prejudice reflected deeper German assumptions. The Messerschmitt Bf 109, designed by Willy Messerschmitt, embodied Nazi ideals of form following function. Its angular lines, straight wings, and aggressive profile suggested power and efficiency. The Spitfire, with its curved wings and rounded fuselage, seemed almost feminine by comparison, an insult to pilots who saw aerial combat as the ultimate test of masculine prowess. Reichsmarshal Hermann Göring personally dismissed British fighter development during a February 1940 meeting with Luftwaffe commanders. The Spitfire, he declared, is a testament to British degeneracy. They build fighters that look like toys. Our pilots will swat them from the sky like insects. This attitude permeated German tactical planning for the Battle of Britain. Intelligence assessments consistently underestimated Spitfire capabilities, assuming that aesthetic shortcomings indicated technical inferiority. But the Spitfire's appearance was no accident. It was the result of deliberate engineering genius by Reginald Joseph Mitchell, a designer who understood that in aerial combat, the laws of physics mattered more than the opinions of critics. Mitchell, dying of cancer even as his creation took shape, had obsessed over every detail. The elliptical wings, far from being aesthetic choices, represented optimal aerodynamic efficiency. The curved surfaces minimized drag while maximizing lift. The bulbous fuselage housed a Rolls-Royce Merlin engine producing 1,030 horsepower, more than any German fighter possessed in 1940. The design process had consumed Mitchell's final years. He died in June 1937, just as the first production Spitfires rolled off assembly lines at Supermarine's Southampton factory. He never lived to see his ugly duckling prove itself in combat. But his engineering principles, particularly the wing design, would prove revolutionary. The elliptical wing offered several crucial advantages. Its shape provided ideal lift distribution across the span, allowing tight turns at high speeds. The thin profile reduced drag, enabling higher top speeds than contemporary fighters. The structure could accommodate 8 .303 caliber Browning machine guns, creating devastating firepower. German engineers, reviewing captured Spitfire components after early engagements, grudgingly acknowledged the wing's sophistication. A technical report from Reckland Testing Center in October 1940 noted, "The British wing design demonstrates advanced understanding of aerodynamic principles. The elliptical planform achieves optimal lift-to-drag ratio. This represents serious engineering, not aesthetic preference." The confrontation that would shatter German illusions began forming weeks before August 15th. RAF Fighter Command, led by Air Chief Marshal Hugh Dowding, had been carefully husbanding resources while the Luftwaffe hammered British ports and airfields. Dowding understood that pilots and aircraft were irreplaceable in ways that German commanders, backed by continental production, couldn't comprehend. His strategy involved precise deployment of Spitfire and Hurricane squadrons based on real-time intelligence from the Chain Home Radar Network. No. 609 Squadron, based at Warmwell in Dorset, had received their first Spitfire Mark I's in May 1940. Squadron leader Donald MacDonell, a pre-war RAF officer with engineering training, immediately recognized the aircraft's potential. Unlike pilots accustomed to biplanes or even Hurricanes, MacDonell saw the Spitfire as a quantum leap in fighter design. Its responsiveness, speed, and firepower created tactical possibilities that traditional combat doctrine hadn't anticipated. MacDonell drilled his pilots in tactics specifically designed for the Spitfire's capabilities. Height advantage combined with diving attacks, tight-turning engagements that exploited the elliptical wing's performance, coordinated fire that concentrated all 8 machine guns on single targets. By August, 609 Squadron had become one of Fighter Command's premier units, though they'd seen limited combat. August 15, 1940, Adlertag, Eagle Day, represented the Luftwaffe's maximum effort to destroy RAF Fighter Command as a prelude to invasion. The German plan involved overwhelming attacks across southern England using the Luftwaffe's entire bomber and fighter strength. At 1100 hours, Luftflotte 5 launched raids from Norway against northeastern England. At 11:30, Luftflotte 2 struck from France and Belgium against southeastern England. The goal was to force Fighter Command to disperse its squadrons, making them vulnerable to destruction in detail. Squadron leader MacDonell received the scramble order at 11:05 hours. Radar stations had detected a massive formation building over Pas-de-Calais. 55 Junkers, Ju 87 Stukas, the dive bombers that had terrorized Europe, escorted by 40 Messerschmitt Bf 109s. The formation's target was Hawkinge Aerodrome near Folkestone, a crucial sector station for Fighter Command. MacDonell led 12 Spitfires airborne from Warmwell, climbing hard toward the projected intercept point. His orders were clear: ignore the bombers, engage the fighters. This contradicted traditional fighter tactics that prioritized bomber destruction, but Dowding's strategy recognized that eliminating German fighters would leave bombers vulnerable to follow-up attacks. At 11,000 feet, climbing through scattered clouds over Kent, Flight Lieutenant Johnny Allen spotted the German formation first. "Bandits, 2 o'clock high," he transmitted, counting at least 40 plus. They were still climbing when MacDonell assessed the tactical situation. The Germans held altitude advantage, always critical in fighter combat. but they were in standard close formation, prioritizing defensive mutual support over maneuverability. MacDonell made his decision instantly. Continue climb to 30,000 feet, position sun behind us, then diving attack through their formation. Standard bounce tactics, but executed with Spitfire advantages that German pilots had never faced. The climb took 4 minutes, pushing the Merlin engines to their limits. At 30,000 feet, the Spitfires leveled off, positioned between the German formation at 25,000 feet and the brilliant August sun. The Messerschmitt pilots below never saw them coming. German tactical doctrine assumed fighters would engage from behind or below, not from the sun at extreme altitude. The Luftwaffe pilots maintained their tight formation, scanning the horizon for hurricanes they expected to rise from British airfields. They were still joking about ugly British fighters when MacDonell rolled inverted and dove. The Spitfires plummeted through 5,000 feet in 15 seconds, reaching speeds exceeding 400 miles per hour. The elliptical wings, designed by Mitchell for precisely these conditions, remained stable even as conventional wings would have experienced control surface flutter. At 26,000 feet, still accelerating, MacDonell opened fire. His first burst, a 3-second concentration of 8 machine guns, delivering 160 rounds per second, struck the lead Messerschmitt's engine. The German pilot, Feldwebel Klaus Hoffmann, had no warning. His instrument panel exploded in his face. Oil sprayed across his windscreen. The Daimler-Benz 601 engine seized immediately, trailing black smoke. Hoffmann rolled inverted and dove, attempting to reach friendly territory before his fighter became uncontrollable. Before the German formation could react, 11 more Spitfires were among them. The tactical advantage of the diving attack, combined with the Spitfire's superior turning ability, created chaos in the disciplined Luftwaffe formation. German pilots, trained for coordinated mutual support, found themselves in individual dogfights where their training meant nothing against an aircraft that could outturn, outclimb, and outgun them. Pilot Officer Jeffrey Wellham, the youngest pilot in 609 Squadron at 18 years old, destroyed 2 Messerschmitts in his first combat engagement. Years later, he would describe the experience in his memoir, First Light. The Spitfire responded to every input instantly. No lag, no hesitation. I thought turn, and the aircraft turned. The Germans flew competently, but they were in aircraft that couldn't match ours. It was like watching men with clubs fight men with swords. The engagement lasted precisely 9 minutes from first contact to German withdrawal. In that time, MacDonell's squadron achieved results that would have been impossible in any other fighter. 12 Messerschmitt Bf 109s destroyed outright, 7 more damaged and forced to withdraw, the entire escort formation scattered, and the Stuka bombers left completely unprotected. Follow-up attacks by Hurricane squadrons decimated the vulnerable dive bombers. Of the 55 Stukas that crossed the coast, only 23 returned to France. The raid on Hawkinge was completely abandoned. The cost to 609 Squadron? 0 aircraft lost. 2 Spitfires damaged by defensive fire from Messerschmitts, both aircraft returning to base and operational by the following day. The kill-to-loss ratio was theoretically infinite, 12-0, a mathematical impossibility that should never occur between competent opposing forces flying contemporary aircraft. If you're enjoying this deep dive into World War II aviation history and want to see more detailed analyses of the weapons and tactics that changed warfare, make sure to subscribe to the channel and hit that notification bell so you never miss an episode. German pilots returning to their bases in France reported encounters with a British fighter that shouldn't have existed. Hauptmann Werner Milders, who survived the engagement, filed a combat report that reached Reichsmarschall Göring within hours. The British Spitfire, Milders wrote, is not the inferior aircraft our intelligence suggested. It possesses superior turning ability, comparable speed, and excellent visibility for the pilot. Our pilots encountered an aircraft that negates our tactical advantages. This requires immediate reassessment. Göring's response was predictably dismissive. He attributed the losses to pilot error and poor formation discipline. The Messerschmitt 109 remained superior, he declared in a meeting with his staff. Our pilots simply allowed themselves to be surprised. But pilots who had faced Spitfires knew differently. Within days, a dangerous truth was circulating through Luftwaffe fighter units. The British possessed a fighter that was, in several crucial aspects, superior to Germany's best. The technical comparison between the Spitfire Mark I and the Messerschmitt Bf 109E, the variants facing each other in August 1940, reveals why German pilots found themselves outmatched. Maximum speed, Spitfire, 362 miles per hour at 19,000 feet. Messerschmitt, 354 miles per hour at 19,000 feet. The Spitfire held an 8-mile-per-hour advantage at critical combat altitudes. Climb rate: Spitfire 2,650 feet per minute, Messerschmitt 3,100 feet per minute. The Messerschmitt climbed faster, an advantage in initial engagement, but the Spitfire's sustained climb performance at altitude proved superior due to the Merlin engine's supercharger characteristics. Service ceiling: Spitfire 36,000 feet, Messerschmitt 36,900 feet. Effectively identical. Turn radius at 15,000 feet, Spitfire 780 feet, Messerschmitt 840 feet. The Spitfire could complete a full circle in less space, critical for dogfighting. Roll rate: Messerschmitt superior. The German fighter could change direction faster, though the advantage decreased at higher speeds due to heavier control forces. Armament: Spitfire 8, 303 caliber Browning machine guns with 300 rounds per gun, total of 2,400 rounds. Messerschmitt 213mm MG, 17 machine guns, and two 20mm MGFF cannon. The German armament hit harder per round, but the British volume of fire proved more practical against maneuvering targets. Perhaps most significantly, the Spitfire offered superior visibility. The bubble canopy and thin fuselage gave pilots exceptional awareness of their surroundings. The Messerschmitt's heavy framing and thicker fuselage created blind spots that could prove fatal in turning engagements. Pilot accounts consistently emphasized this advantage. Flight Lieutenant Bob Doe of No. 2, 3-4 Squadron noted, "In a Spitfire, you could see everywhere, 360 degrees of awareness. The Germans had to move their entire aircraft to see behind them. We just turned our heads." The ugly elliptical wings mocked by German pilots represented the Spitfire's greatest advantage. R. J. Mitchell's design achieved optimal lift distribution across the wingspan, meaning that lift was generated evenly from root to tip. This eliminated wingtip stalling, allowing the Spitfire to maintain control at extreme angles of attack where other fighters would spin. In combat, this translated to tighter turns at higher speeds without losing control. German pilots attempting to match Spitfire turn rates often found their aircraft stalling, entering spins, or experiencing control surface flutter. The wing's structure also provided exceptional strength despite its thin profile. The main spar, a massive D-section aluminum beam, could withstand load factors exceeding 12 Gs, far beyond what the human pilot could survive. This over-engineering gave pilots confidence to throw the aircraft into violent maneuvers without fear of structural failure. The production miracle behind the Spitfire challenged German assumptions about British industrial capacity. The Supermarine Works at Southampton produced Spitfires using semi-artisan methods that German engineers found baffling. Each aircraft required over 20,000 man-hours to complete, 4 times the labor investment of a Messerschmitt. The fuselage involved complex compound curves that required skilled metalworkers to hand form. The wings, with their elliptical shape and thin profile, demanded precision manufacturing that mass production techniques couldn't yet achieve. Lord Beaverbrook, appointed Minister of Aircraft Production in May 1940, organized what became known as the Spitfire Fund. Citizens donated money to build specific aircraft, with donors' names painted on the fuselage. This grassroots financing, combined with dispersed production facilities established after the Southampton factory was bombed, created a resilient production system. By September 1940, Supermarine and its dispersed facilities were producing 60 Spitfires weekly. By 1941, production exceeded 100 weekly. Total wartime production reached 20,351 aircraft across multiple variants. The Messerschmitt, by contrast, produced 33,984 units total, but this represented production across 6 years. In 1940, when it mattered most, British Spitfire production actually exceeded German Messerschmitt output month by month during the critical Battle of Britain period. The psychological impact on Luftwaffe. Pilots proved as devastating as the tactical defeats. Men who had dominated European skies suddenly faced an opponent that could best them in most combat situations. Oberst Adolf Galland, one of Germany's top aces, famously requested Spitfires for his own unit when Göring asked what he needed to win the battle. The quote, often disputed, nevertheless captured the reality. German fighter pilots respected and feared the Spitfire in ways they never feared hurricanes or other Allied fighters. Lieutenant Julius Neumann, who survived numerous engagements with Spitfires, wrote in his diary, "We called them Spitfeber, Spitfire fever." Pilots would report illness rather than fly missions where Spitfires were expected. The psychological pressure of facing an aircraft that could outperform yours, flown by pilots defending their homeland, created stress that no amount of training could eliminate. The intelligence failure that led to German underestimation of the Spitfire stemmed from systematic flaws in Luftwaffe reconnaissance and analysis. Early reports from 1939 and early 1940 had been accurate. The Spitfire was fast, maneuverable, and well-armed. But these reports conflicted with ideological assumptions about British degeneracy and engineering inferiority. Senior Luftwaffe officers committed to Nazi racial theories dismissed accurate intelligence as defeatist or exaggerated. Captured RAF pilots, interrogated at the Auswärterstelle West Intelligence Center, consistently praised the Spitfire's capabilities, but their testimony was discounted as propaganda. Not until August 1940, when combat losses became undeniable, did German intelligence begin accurately assessing British fighter capabilities. By then, tactical and strategic decisions had been made based on false assumptions. The August 15th engagement, while exceptional, represented a pattern that repeated throughout the Battle of Britain. Between July 10th and October 31st, 1940, Spitfire squadrons claimed approximately 515 German aircraft destroyed for the loss of 208 Spitfires. While actual German losses were lower, post-war analysis confirming approximately 300, the ratio remained heavily in Britain's favor. More significantly, Spitfire loss rates were consistently lower than Hurricane loss rates despite Spitfires engaging in more fighter versus fighter combat. Individual aces demonstrated the Spitfire's potential. Squadron leader Douglas Bader, the legless pilot who became a legend, achieved 20 confirmed kills flying Spitfires, developing the big wing tactics that concentrated multiple squadrons against German formations. Pilot Officer Erich Locke of No. 4. One squadron achieved 26 confirmed kills, making him the RAF's highest-scoring pilot during the Battle of Britain, all achieved in Spitfires between July and November 1940 before he was shot down and killed over France. Flight Lieutenant James Lacey of No. 5, 01 Squadron destroyed 18 German aircraft during the battle, later writing about the Spitfire's qualities. It wasn't just fast or maneuverable. It was the complete package: engine, airframe, weapons, visibility. all optimized for fighter combat. German pilots flew competent aircraft. We flew the best fighter in the world. The evolution of the Spitfire during and after the Battle of Britain proved German critics wrong on another level. The basic Mitchell design proved capable of continuous improvement across 24 major variants, produced until 1950. Each version increased performance while maintaining the fundamental aerodynamic excellence of the original design. The Mark V, introduced in early 1941, featured the more powerful Merlin 45 engine producing 1,440 horsepower. This variant could reach 371 miles per hour and climb to 30,000 feet in 7.4 minutes. It restored British performance superiority after the Germans introduced the improved Messerschmitt Bf 109F. The Mark IX, entering service in mid-1942, featured a two-stage supercharged Merlin 61 engine. This power plant transformed high-altitude performance, allowing the Spitfire to intercept German reconnaissance aircraft at 43,000 feet, altitudes where earlier fighters couldn't operate effectively. The Mark XIV, introduced in late 1943, mounted the massive Rolls-Royce Griffon engine, producing 2,030 horsepower. This variant achieved 448 miles per hour, making it one of the fastest piston engine fighters ever built. It served primarily against V-1 flying bombs, shooting down over 300 of the unmanned cruise missiles threatening London. Each evolution maintained Mitchell's elliptical wing design, the feature German pilots had mocked as ugly. Engineers discovered that the basic wing platform could accommodate increases in weight, power, and speed far beyond original specifications. The structural over-engineering that had seemed excessive in 1936 proved essential for variants produced a decade later. The Spitfire's combat record extended far beyond the Battle of Britain. In the Mediterranean theater, Spitfires equipped with tropical filters operated from Malta, defending the besieged island against overwhelming Italian and German air attacks. Between April 1942 and October 1942, Malta-based Spitfires claimed over 330 Axis aircraft destroyed, helping preserve the strategic outpost that controlled Mediterranean sea lanes. In the Pacific, Spitfire Mark VIIIs equipped Royal Australian Air Force squadrons operating from Darwin and New Guinea. While generally considered less suitable for Pacific conditions than American fighters, RAAF pilots achieved respectable kill ratios against Japanese aircraft. Number 452 Squadron claimed 89 Japanese aircraft destroyed between February 1943 and August 1945, demonstrating the Spitfire's versatility across diverse combat environments. The post-war fate of the Messerschmitt and Spitfire illustrated their respective legacies. The Messerschmitt Bf 109, despite being produced in greater numbers, disappeared from frontline service by 1946. The design, optimized for conditions of 1938, couldn't evolve beyond its original parameters. The Spitfire, by contrast, served with multiple air forces into the 1950s. The final combat mission by a Spitfire occurred in 1954 when Irish Air Corps Spitfire Mark IXs flew reconnaissance missions. The last Spitfire retired from military service in 1955, 15 years after the Battle of Britain. This longevity proved Mitchell's genius. The Ugly Duckling's basic design was so fundamentally sound that it remained relevant across the entire transition from early war to jet age. No other World War II fighter achieved comparable service longevity. German assessments of the Spitfire evolved from contempt to respect to something approaching awe as the war progressed. General-Lieutenant Adolf Galland, in his post-war memoir The First and the Last, wrote extensively about confronting Spitfires. The Spitfire was our most dangerous opponent. In the hands of a competent pilot, it was nearly invincible. Our tactical advantages of altitude and surprise could be negated by a Spitfire pilot who saw us first. The aircraft's performance envelope gave British pilots options we couldn't match. Oberst Johannes Steinhoff, who survived over 900 combat missions and eventually commanded a jet fighter squadron, reflected on the Spitfire's impact. We learned to fear the elliptical wings. When you saw that distinctive shape in your mirror, you knew you were in for a real fight. The mockery stopped after the first encounters. After that, we treated every Spitfire with maximum respect. The human stories behind the August 15th massacre reveal both British determination and German vulnerability. Of the 12 German pilots shot down that morning, 4 were killed, 3 captured, and 5 rescued by Kriegsmarine vessels. One of the dead, Oberfeldwebel Ernst Bohm, was a veteran of the Spanish Civil War, with 22 confirmed kills. His death exemplified how experience couldn't compensate for aircraft performance disadvantages. On the British side, several pilots from 609 Squadron went on to distinguished careers. Squadron leader Donald MacDonell survived the war with 8 confirmed kills, later serving as an RAF test pilot. Flight Lieutenant Johnny Allen, who spotted the German formation first, ended the war with 14 confirmed victories. Pilot Officer Jeffrey Wellham, the youngest pilot, survived being shot down twice, captured once, escaping, and ultimately achieved 7 confirmed kills before being wrested from combat operations in 1942 due to combat fatigue. Before we continue with the incredible story of how the Spitfire's reputation evolved through the war years, I want to remind you to subscribe to this channel if you're enjoying this content. We release detailed military history videos every week, and your subscription helps us continue bringing these stories to life. The industrial and technical competition between Britain and Germany revealed fundamental differences in approach to fighter development. German aircraft design emphasized immediate tactical superiority through advanced features like fuel injection engines, cannon armament, and superior climb rates. These advantages proved real in early war conditions, but German designers achieved these capabilities by pushing contemporary technology to its limits, leaving little room for improvement. British designers, particularly Mitchell, prioritized fundamental aerodynamic excellence and structural integrity over immediate tactical advantages. The Spitfire's machine gun armament was less powerful than German cannon, but the basic airframe could later accommodate cannon when production difficulties were resolved. The Merlin engine, while initially less powerful than the Daimler-Benz 601, had greater development potential that Rolls-Royce systematically exploited across multiple versions. This design philosophy extended to production. German aircraft manufacturing emphasized precision engineering that required skilled labor and tight tolerances. British manufacturing accepted looser tolerances in non-critical areas, concentrating precision where it mattered for performance and safety. This approach allowed faster production with less skilled labor, critical when experienced workers were drafted for military service. The Spitfire Fund, launched by Lord Beaverbrook in summer 1940, represented another British advantage. Citizens and organizations donated funds to build specific Spitfires, with each aircraft named after the donor. The phenomenon created personal connections between civilians and the air defense system. Workers knew they were building aircraft for their communities, not abstract military requirements. This psychological factor contributed to quality control and productivity that purely rational management couldn't achieve. German pilots, learning of this grassroots funding model, found it simultaneously admirable and contemptible. Admirable because it demonstrated national unity they recognized as powerful. Contemptible because it seemed to confirm their prejudices about British amateurism and lack of systematic organization. They couldn't understand that distributed, voluntary cooperation could be more effective than centralized command. The air combat tactics that evolved around the Spitfire challenged established doctrine on both sides. Pre-war RAF tactics emphasized tight formations and coordinated attacks following rigid procedures. These tactics, developed in peacetime exercises, proved suicidal against experienced German pilots using flexible finger-4 formations. Squadron leader Donald MacDonell and other innovative commanders gradually adopted German tactical formations while exploiting Spitfire performance advantages. The result was a hybrid approach that combined German tactical flexibility with British aircraft superiority. Finger-4 formations of Spitfires, with each pilot responsible for covering his partner rather than maintaining rigid formation position, proved devastatingly effective. The August 15th engagement succeeded partly because MacDonell had drilled his squadron in these tactics for weeks before the battle. German tactical evolution couldn't compensate for aircraft performance gaps. Luftwaffe fighter tactics in 1940 assumed performance parity or superiority. When the Spitfire proved superior in most performance metrics except roll rate and dive, German tactics became increasingly defensive. Instead of aggressively engaging British fighters, Messerschmitt units increasingly focused on protecting bombers, a psychologically debilitating shift for pilots trained as offensive fighters. The strain showed in German pilot reports and diaries from late summer 1940. Lieutenant Heinz Knoche wrote in August 1940, "We no longer seek combat with Spitfires. Our orders are to engage only when forced to defend our bombers. This defensive posture conflicts with everything we learned in training. It damages morale more than the actual combats." The manufacturing story of the Spitfire during the Battle of Britain demonstrated British industrial resilience. On September 26, 1940, Luftwaffe bombers destroyed the Supermarine works at Southampton. German intelligence predicted this would cripple Spitfire production for months. Instead, Supermarine dispersed production to over 35 small facilities within weeks. Automobile repair garages, bus depots, even furniture workshops began producing Spitfire components. This distribution actually increased production resilience. Bombing could destroy individual facilities, but couldn't eliminate the entire production network. By October 1940, daily Spitfire production exceeded pre-bombing levels despite the loss of the main factory. This adaptability baffled German planners who assumed that destroying identified factories would eliminate production. The human cost of defending Britain with Spitfires was severe but sustainable. Between July and October 1940, Fighter Command lost 515 pilots killed or missing and 975 aircraft destroyed. But the training pipeline, though strained, continued producing replacement pilots. Commonwealth volunteers, particularly from Canada, Australia, New Zealand, and South Africa, provided crucial reinforcements. German losses, while numerically similar, were strategically crippling. The Luftwaffe lost over 900 experienced pilots, many of them irreplaceable veterans of Poland, Norway, and France. German pilot training couldn't match attrition rates. By October 1940, Luftwaffe fighter squadrons operated at 60% strength, with pilots averaging less than 100 hours flight time, compared to experienced pilots with over 300 hours earlier in the campaign. The strategic outcome of the Battle of Britain vindicated the Spitfire's design and the pilots who flew it. By October 31, 1940, when the battle officially ended, the Luftwaffe had failed to achieve air superiority necessary for Operation Sea Lion, the planned invasion of Britain. German aircraft production couldn't replace losses while maintaining offensive operations. Pilot attrition, particularly among experienced leaders, degraded tactical effectiveness to unsustainable levels. The Spitfire's role in this victory was disproportionate to its numbers. Spitfire squadrons comprised only about one-third of Fighter Command's strength, with Hurricane squadrons making up the majority. But Spitfires engaged German fighters preferentially, while Hurricanes focused on bombers, a division of labor that exploited each type's strengths. Post-war analysis suggests Spitfires accounted for approximately 40% of German losses while representing 30% of Fighter Command strength, a significantly positive ratio. The German reaction to their failure revealed how completely the Spitfire had shattered their assumptions. In November 1940, Reichsmarschall Göring demanded answers from his fighter commanders. His famous question, "What do you need to defeat the British?" received Gallen's equally famous reply, "A squadron of Spitfires." While probably apocryphal, the exchange captured the psychological shift. German pilots no longer believed in their equipment's superiority. The post-Battle of Britain evolution of both fighters illuminated their fundamental design differences. The Messerschmitt Bf 109 reached its effective development limit with the Gustav variant in 1942. Later versions became progressively heavier, less maneuverable, and more difficult to fly as designers tried to maintain performance parity with Allied fighters. The final variants, produced in 1945, were so overloaded with armor and weapons that they handled worse than the original 109B from 1938. The Spitfire, by contrast, improved continuously across 24 major variants. The Griffon engine versions produced in 1944 and 1945 were fundamentally better aircraft than 1940 Mark I's, maintaining the original's excellent handling while adding substantial performance improvements. This adaptability proved Mitchell's design genius. He had created not just a good fighter for 1940, but a platform that could evolve with technology. The aesthetic judgments that initially led Germans to dismiss the Spitfire revealed deeper failures in Nazi ideology. The assumption that beauty indicated quality and that ugly necessarily meant inferior reflected simplistic thinking incompatible with engineering reality. Mitchell's elliptical wings were beautiful precisely because they were functionally optimal. Form had followed function perfectly, creating aesthetic appeal as a byproduct of aerodynamic excellence. German designers like Willy Messerschmitt certainly understood aerodynamics. The Messerschmitt 109 was an excellent fighter, but the German design process emphasized different priorities: ease of production, ease of maintenance, and tactical flexibility. These were valid concerns that produced a competent aircraft, but they didn't produce the level of aerodynamic optimization that Mitchell achieved through obsessive refinement of the wing design. The human dimension of the Spitfire story transcends technical specifications and combat statistics. For British pilots, the Spitfire represented hope during Britain's darkest hours, when hurricanes felt adequate but not exceptional, when the odds seemed overwhelming. Climbing into a Spitfire provided confidence that your aircraft wouldn't let you down. This psychological factor proved immeasurable, but crucial. Squadron leader Geoffrey Wellham, who flew Spitfires throughout the Battle of Britain, captured this feeling decades later. The Spitfire was more than a machine, it was a partner, a friend. You trusted it completely. In combat, when everything was confusion and terror, the aircraft responded instantly to every input. It gave you a chance when otherwise you'd have none. That trust, that partnership, was as important as any technical specification. For German pilots, the Spitfire represented the moment their assumed superiority collapsed. Men who had dominated European skies suddenly faced opponents who could best them in equal combat. The psychological impact exceeded the tactical impact. Knowing that British pilots flew superior aircraft undermined the racial superiority narratives that justified the war. If degenerate British could build better fighters than Aryan engineers, what did that say about Nazi ideology? The production statistics tell their own story about industrial capacity and national will. Britain produced 20,351 Spitfires despite being under sustained attack, despite losing major production facilities, despite resource constraints that Germany never faced. Germany produced 33,984 Messerschmitts across a longer period with access to conquered Europe's resources. The per-year averages reveal British efficiency exceeded German output despite all apparent disadvantages. More remarkably, Spitfire quality remained consistently high throughout production. German aircraft quality deteriorated noticeably after 1942 as experienced workers were drafted, and slave labor increasingly staffed production lines. British quality control, maintained by civilian workers emotionally invested in the aircraft defending their homes, actually improved over time. The legacy of the Spitfire extends beyond its combat record to its cultural impact. The aircraft became a symbol of British resistance, embodying determination, excellence, and defiance of overwhelming odds. No other military aircraft achieved comparable, iconic status in its own country's culture. Children who watched Spitfires defending their skies in 1940 grew up venerating the aircraft. Veterans who flew them never forgot the experience. The emotional connection between the British people and the Spitfire remained powerful for generations. German veterans, by contrast, remembered the Spitfire with respect but also frustration and even bitterness. It represented the moment their confidence turned to doubt, when victory seemed possible, turned to grinding attrition, when they learned that better training and experience couldn't overcome fundamental aircraft performance gaps. For Luftwaffe survivors, the Spitfire symbolized the war's turning point, the battle they couldn't win. The technical achievements that Mitchell's ugly duckling represented influenced post-war aviation development globally. The elliptical wing design, while too complex for mass production, inspired countless attempts to achieve similar aerodynamic efficiency through simpler means. The lesson that fundamental aerodynamic excellence matters more than tactical compromises shaped fighter design philosophy for decades. The concept that a versatile platform capable of evolution beats a specialized design optimized for current conditions became conventional wisdom. Modern fighter design still reflects lessons learned from the Spitfire's success. Multi-role versatility, growth potential, pilot visibility, control harmony, all priorities in current aircraft trace lineage to principles that made the Spitfire effective. The ugly duckling that German pilots mocked in 1940 established design principles that remain relevant in the 21st century. The August 15, 1940 engagement, where 12 Messerschmitts fell in 9 minutes, represented more than tactical victory. It symbolized the collision between ideology and reality, between assumption and evidence, between prejudice and performance. German pilots who survived learned that aesthetic judgment doesn't determine aerial combat outcomes. Physics, engineering, and pilot skill decide who lives and who dies. Squadron leader Donald MacDonell's after-action report, filed hours after the engagement, was characteristically understated. Squadron intercepted enemy fighters escorting bomber formation, engaged from superior altitude, destroyed 12 enemy aircraft confirmed, 7 probable, for no losses. Spitfires performed excellently. All aircraft returned to base. The dry military prose couldn't capture the psychological impact, the dawning realization among Luftwaffe pilots that they faced aircraft and pilots they couldn't consistently defeat. The German intelligence assessment, filed a week later after interrogating captured pilots and analyzing wreckage, came closer to acknowledging reality: the British Spitfire. Mark I, the report concluded, represents first-class fighter design. Aerodynamic efficiency exceeds our current capabilities. Performance in critical combat parameters matches or exceeds the Messerschmitt Bf 109E. Previous assessments based on aesthetic judgments were fundamentally incorrect. This aircraft demands maximum respect and tactical caution from our pilots. That last phrase, demands maximum respect and tactical caution, represented the complete reversal of German attitudes in just 3 months of combat. The ugly Spitfire, the pregnant duck, the aesthetically offensive fighter, had proven itself the finest fighter aircraft of 1940. German mockery had turned to fear, contempt to respect, confidence to doubt. The Battle of Britain continued through October 1940, with the Spitfire playing an increasingly dominant role. As Luftwaffe tactics shifted from daylight bombing to night operations, Spitfire squadrons were freed for offensive sweeps over France, the beginning of a tactical reversal that would continue throughout the war. By 1941, Spitfires were escorting British bombers over occupied Europe, the exact role German fighters had failed to perform successfully over Britain. The lasting lesson of the Spitfire's triumph over the Messerschmitt extends beyond technical specifications or tactical victories. It demonstrates that in warfare, as in any complex endeavor, assumptions based on superficial observations lead to catastrophic failures. The German leadership's aesthetic prejudices, their ideological blindness, their contempt for democratic societies, all contributed to systematic underestimation of British capabilities. R.J. Mitchell, dying of cancer, could never have imagined that his final design would become the aircraft that saved his country. He designed a fighter optimized for performance, not aesthetics. He created elliptical wings because they were aerodynamically superior, not because they looked distinctive. He engineered structural strength that seemed excessive because he understood fighters would need to evolve. His genius lay in understanding that excellence comes from rigorous application of fundamental principles, not from trying to appear superior. The Spitfire remains, decades after its last combat mission, one of history's most significant fighter aircraft, not because it shot down more enemy planes than any other fighter. Hurricane pilots claimed more victories during the Battle of Britain, not because it was the fastest or most heavily armed. Jet fighters and later piston aircraft exceeded its performance, but because it represented the moment when excellence defeated contempt, when engineering overcame ideology, when the ugly duckling proved itself the swan. German pilots who mocked the Spitfire in July 1940 spent the rest of the war trying to avoid engaging them in combat. The pregnant duck became the predator that dominated European skies. The aesthetically offensive fighter became the aircraft that broke the Luftwaffe's spirit. The ugly Spitfire proved that in aerial combat, as in life, substance defeats style every time. Squadron leader. MacDonell's 12 victories in 9 minutes on August 15, 1940, represented not just exceptional piloting, but vindication of Mitchell's design genius. Every German Messerschmitt that fell confirmed that the elliptical wings weren't ugly, they were optimal. The bulbous fuselage wasn't clumsy, it was practical. The overall design wasn't offensive, it was excellent. The Germans mocked Britain's ugly Spitfire until it shot down 12 Messerschmitts in 9 minutes. Then they stopped mocking. They started running, and they never stopped running until the war ended with their complete defeat. The swan with teeth had proven itself superior in every way that mattered, leaving German critics with nothing but the memory of their fatal underestimation. In the end, R.J. Mitchell's ugly duckling became the most beautiful fighter of the war, beautiful not for its appearance, but for what it represented: excellence, determination, and the triumph of engineering genius over ideological blindness. The Spitfire saved Britain in 1940, but more than that, it proved that in the crucible of combat, technical excellence and pilot skill defeat assumptions, prejudices, and contempt. The lesson remains relevant today. Underestimate your opponents at your peril. Judge by performance, not appearance. And never ever dismiss something as inferior simply because it looks different from what you expect. The ugly Spitfire, with its elliptical wings, flew into history as one of the finest fighters ever built, leaving German mockery behind in the wreckage of 12 Messerschmitts scattered across Kent on that August morning when the swan revealed its teeth.